Hey guys, it's Kate Fagan here, and I am bringing Ephesians 2 to you in this While We Wait series. And so let's jump into it. If you have your Jesus Bibles, this is the one that I'm using. We actually gave these out for free to all Root students. So if you don't have one and you're a Root student, I would encourage you to pick one up next time that we're all gathered together again. And you know what? This will be over at some point soon, and we will gather together again, but in this time, I want us to take advantage of the space that God has created for us, clear of all those distractions and excuses that we typically make, and I want us to really do the hard work of allowing God to reveal things within our lives, and not just hard work, but I want us to actually accept the rest that God has for us. Remember, all throughout Scripture, there's a theme of God giving us rest and giving us peace, and so I want us to actually be recipients of that. We have a tendency to deny that a lot, and so anyway, I want to jump into Ephesians 2, and so if you have your Jesus Bible, I will be on page 1830, and if you do not have a Jesus Bible and you're just following along, then Ephesians comes right after Galatians, and that's in the New Testament. And so this is where I am. So this is the end, this is the beginning. So we're kind of towards the end here. And so I wanted to jump in first. I want to talk about Charlie touched a little bit about touched on Paul, and Paul is writing to the people of Ephesus. And he's writing from prison, and Charlie kind of said, oh, it could be a Roman prison, it could be a prison in Ephesus, but I want to talk a little bit about who the Ephesians were first. And so Ephesus is a booming metropolis, so I want us to think big city, like New York City, Miami, and so it's a big cultural center. And so, like most cultural centers, it's very diverse. And so you've got Jews and Gentiles. And if you're not familiar with that Gentile language, it's basically Jews and non-Jews. I would be considered a Gentile because I am not Jewish. Although I am 2% Jewish according to my 23andMe. So, who knew? Okay, so we've got Jews and Gentiles, and they have always been very, very separated. And I want us to really think for a second about maybe like how these people, they didn't have like disagreements, squabbles like we tend to have within like our own American culture. We're talking about thousands of years of deep, deep ethnic prejudice going on here. And so this is something that you were raised to understand, like who the Jews were, who the Gentiles were, and that you do not mix at all. And so to make this point even clearer, the racism, the prejudice was so deep between these groups that, for example, I think the Jews were told, or there's like a Jewish saying that was said, do not aid a Gentile in birth because you would be aiding a barbarian coming into the world. So we're talking about deep-seated, really, really broken stuff between humanity here. And we can get tastes of that. We kind of understand what that is to some extent, but maybe just not on the cultural extent that they would have lived. And so when Paul is introducing chapter 2, he begins with the fact that we were dead in our transgressions, and then Christ made us alive. And so Paul begins his argument by talking about reconciliation between humanity and God. And so through Christ, we have reconciliation with God. We were alienated from him, alienated from his presence, but through Christ, we were reconciled to him. So he begins with that. And it's all about God's grace. And so it has nothing to do with anything that we've done, but purely his love. So I want us to look at, verse 4. It's because of his great love for us. It's because of his richness and mercy. It's because of his incomparable riches of grace. It is because of his kindness to us. It is by grace that you have been saved through faith. And it is not from ourselves. It is a gift from God, not by works, so that no one can boast. And so I want us to think about them hearing that for the first time. First of all, it was probably insane that these people were even in a room together. much less both sharing the same faith. And so Paul is addressing this, and he's saying that you cannot create hierarchies between you anymore. See, up until this point, it was like, we're better because of this, this, and this, and you're less than us because of these things that you do. And so they were always doing this hierarchy thing. And so Paul is saying, actually, it has nothing to do with anything that you've done. It is only by God's grace that you're even in this room hearing this letter being read in the first place. And so nobody can boast. No, there's no more hierarchy. This is totally leveled. And so that's the first thing that Paul is talking about in the scriptures. He's talking about how there is no more hierarchy between people, and there is no more barrier between God and humanity. And so with that as sort of the foundation of his argument, he goes in verse 11, and if you have the Jesus Bible, it has these nice little titles, and I think that those are helpful. And the title says, Jew and Gentile reconciled through Christ. And so I want to start with actually verse 14. And it says, for he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one. Think about hearing this for the first time. Like, they're like, wait, my whole life I'm supposed to hate these people. And Paul is saying he has made the two groups one. And he has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. I'm going to pause right there because Charlie actually mentioned this yesterday. He talked about the temple. There was this wall that divided Gentiles from Jews, and on that wall there was an inscription that said, like, Gentiles don't pass over this wall or you be better off dead, is essentially what it was saying. And so Paul is using this temple language, and he's saying that he has destroyed the barrier and the dividing wall of hostility. And so Christ himself has that thing that was blocking these two people from ever intermixing. Christ has lifted that so that we can be one new human race. And so, and then he goes on to say, and this is verse 16, and in one new humanity out of the two, that's making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to you who were near. For through him we have access to God the Father by one Spirit. And so it's this really unifying language. And it's kind of interesting for us to be talking about alienation from God, alienation from people, because we're in isolation right now. It's just kind of an interesting lens to read this chapter through. And so I want us to take a moment to actually think about maybe what God might be saying to you. And so I'm going to ask two questions. The first question is this. Okay, so Paul starts this chapter by talking about alienation from God, and maybe that is something that really resonated with you. Maybe you feel alienated from God for whatever reason. Maybe you think of all the things that you've done, or things that you don't do well enough, or things that you're probably going to do and you don't want to screw things up. And I want you to know that that's something that I really relate to, because a lot of times I feel that alienation from God because I can think of, man, I'm like, these are all the ways that I've disappointed God. And so I have that wall up. And I want you to remember that God is like, he's torn down that wall. And we actually have no excuses, because he says it has nothing to do with what you do or don't do. It's purely by my grace, by my kindness, by my richness and mercy. And I want you to maybe receive that today, because you're thinking, these are all the reasons why, like, I can't be reconciled to God. And I want you to take a moment and just, like, throw those away. And I want you to realize that it's purely because of God's kindness that you are a child of God. And maybe that's all you need to hear. And maybe you need to experience reconciliation with God, and you don't need to be alienated from him anymore. So I want you to either put that in your back pocket. I want you to think about that. Or I want you to really take some time to meditate on this second question. The second question is this. Maybe you really resonate with what the Jews and the Gentiles are experiencing, that hostility, that deep, like, hatred. And you know, it could be something that was just from last week, or it could be something that was years, or maybe it was something that you were raised to think about a person or a certain group of people. And so I want you to take a moment, and I want you to identify maybe someone in your heart, or someone in your home, or a group of people that you have hostility towards, that God is saying, you need to take down that dividing wall that Christ conquered. And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about maybe possibly reaching out to somebody today. You know, we've got time. We've got time to pray. We've got time to really identify some things, and you've definitely got time to make a phone call. And so maybe you need to make a phone call. But if this person's living in your house, maybe this is the day where you need to have a conversation and say, you know, I've done things that have hurt you. You've done things that have hurt me. But it is by God's grace alone that we can have peace with each other. And so I'm not going to hold these things against you. Please don't hold these things against me. And so maybe that's what you need to do. And maybe if you have some sort of hostility or prejudice or anything like that you've been harboring in your heart for a long time, I pray that you ask God to let that wall be taken down by Christ, and that you realize that through Christ we have one humanity. And so I want you to maybe take some time to ask for some healing, and then maybe reach out to somebody and get help for that. And so anyway, that's Ephesians chapter 2, and I hope that you take some time to actually meditate on those questions and allow God to do some of that heavy lifting in your heart today. And so I love you guys. I hope that you are able to get outside and enjoy this gorgeous weather, and I will talk to y'all soon.